Greetings, Wim Lavenbeck. I actually wanted to revisit a prior clip that I made, not because I think it was bad, but because really I think that there's so much more that can be said about it. Anyway, what I wanted to return to was the question when a student flips out. What should we do when a student flips out? And in the prior clip, I spent time talking about three strategies, if you will, that I think are really good kind of base training for educators. I think it's actually applicable in a lot of settings, but for educators, um, and so I refer back to our iceberg theory, which is kind of like the hat. With the iceberg, you've got part of what's going on is visible, but the rest of it's below the surface. And by understanding that we're only understanding what's going on for an individual based on what's showing, um, we really need to understand more about what's going on underneath. We can come to respond to students freaking out or having heated emotional responses more strategically. The second was similar, but a different version of when somebody's reacting to something in a way that you don't expect, that usually means that there's more going on than you know about. Which the open-ended questions can help us to address both, but really just kind of this basic thing, like if you said something and you didn't mean to insult the person, but they respond back in a way that suggests that, you could usually take that as a pretty good indicator that there's more going on. And the third one was don't get defensive. And I especially think this is important for educators because we could deal with students in a number of ways that basically are demonstrating the stress and the trauma and the experience of the student in in a way that we don't necessarily have as much training as is somebody on dealing with anxieties and uh, stress and so forth. Like, granted, we all know about these things, but not to the level and intensity that we're necessarily able to deal with that. But we also need to manage our own stresses and so forth. And so we frequently internalize student behavior as being a reflection of our ability and our presentation as instructors, which, quite frankly, things can happen before people come to class, like literally minutes before, or sometimes for their whole lifetimes before they get to us, that actually we shouldn't be worried so much about those details. And so by not getting defensive, we can help have like that empathetic and compassionate ear and listen for understanding as opposed to listen to argue. Um, but I wanted to revisit this because I felt like there was still a whole lot more that could be said. In part because a flip out, so to speak, is just a manifestation of a whole broader set of ways that people communicate, including but not limited to the part where what I see as somebody flipping out may actually just be them being enthusiastic. Some of it might be cultural, some of it might be social, some of it could be any number of things. And so, talking about some of the base strategies for conflict resolution, as opposed to just talking about what specific training do I need for this rare event, is maybe less helpful than thinking about what are the things that I should be practicing all the time. And so, the first strategy I want to offer is separate the people from the problem. So you've got a student or a group of students, because it's not necessarily the case that it will be that you just have a single student who is expressing, you know, anxiety or stress. That might be the flip out, but you can frequently have multiple students flipping out over the same thing, but maybe even different sides of it, right? Heated discussions, right? I've spent the last 8 years planning on creating some debates in class because in teaching political science and teaching philosophy and teaching conflict resolution, part of I think what we're doing is learning by doing. So we need to be able to actually encourage students to be able to actually have disagreements. There's no reason that everybody needs to agree all the time, but how do we manage a debate so that what we can do is control, if you will, control a dispute without making that become adversarial or escalate to, a conflict which really goes further than what you'd like to have in a classroom. And so part of the framework of it doesn't, it really doesn't matter. You could talk about gun rights or abortion rights, or if you're a Trump supporter, or if you're opposed to Trump, or whatever, right? Um, you can frame the discussion in advance, right? You can plan for conflict in advance by showcasing that the beliefs that individuals hold are separate and distinct from those individuals, right? So our identities don't have to be wrapped up into it. When we have a debate, it doesn't have to turn into an identity conflict. Some conflicts actually will um, present as being identity conflicts in different ways. I wouldn't encourage a student to say, like, have discussions on what are the benefits of slavery, or what are white supremacists getting right, or when are hate crimes a good strategy, or something, right? Like there are things where you can clearly use conflict in ways that it can be more triggering. But we don't have control, right? Like I said, students show up, right? They show up to class with histories, with thoughts, beliefs, opinions, and so forth. And so, an example that I frequently use um, in presentations and really trying to explore what's going on is the part where Election Day 2016. And I'm giving a lesson plan that helps to articulate the difference between the popular vote and the electoral college. Um, and kind of the last part of this activity is showing students that there is this website that they can go to, and they can click on the state and decide what they think is going to happen to the election there and make their own predictions. And that there's a certain value in hypothesis testing, which is showing what you think is going to happen and then seeing what actually happens, and then reflecting on what that says about the validity, the strength, the merit of your hypothesis versus what went wrong if you were wrong. So I do this. Class is talking. Lots of people are interested in the outcome of the election. I was teaching in kind of this purple circle around Atlanta, where Atlanta as a city in Georgia was pretty liberal, pretty progressive, pretty blue. The rural parts of Georgia are pretty conservative, pretty red. And so there's this band where um, more rural and more urban people meet kind of in this borderland. I mean, there's a lot of universities. Kennesaw State, where I was teaching, was the third largest public institution in the state of Georgia. But so my classes tended to have a balance of about 60-40 to 50-50, somewhere in that range. So you had people of both political persuasions, and not everybody even knew what they thought their political persuasion was coming into the class. To be clear about that as well, some people were very familiar about specific issues, but not necessarily on the whole. Anyway, at the end, I said, "So, are there any other thoughts and feelings?" And then, so I had a white supremacist in this class who spoke out and said, "I think a lot of people are going to be surprised. I think there's a lot of people who are tired of having to apologize because they think some races and some cultures are better than others." And he gave a little bit more detail, but some of the most conservative to that date students in class, their jaws were hitting the floor. Like you can't say that. You can't say that you think some races and some cultures are better than others. Um, so in that moment, I had to react, right? I didn't want to shoot down a student, right? Now there is something brave about sharing in class, especially when you're sharing the not so popular opinion. I didn't want the student to feel challenged. I didn't want to label the remarks. I didn't want to out them. Maybe the student didn't actually identify that as being as so supremacist, although I had subsequent conversations that appeared to indicate that the student was more familiar with that. But so just focusing on this moment in the classroom, somebody says something and that's got people charged. Okay, I mean, it's not just politically, that there's conservatives and Republicans. There's a really diverse classroom in front of me. You know, and so some of the people who are in those groups that would be inferior, right, by this articulation, it was presented in a way that it wasn't explicitly stated that they're tired of apologizing because they think white people are better. But while the conservative students had their jaws on the floor, I could see the smoke coming out of the ears, so to speak, of the students that are like, "What did you just say?" Yeah, so this is the part where the training really needs to kick in. Um, so I said, I see that we've got a strong reaction here. Um, the good news is that we'll all get to watch the results tonight and find out which hypotheses, which theories seem to be validated by what's going to happen with the election. And we get to see which things don't work out that way, right? Um, like your last classmate said, there are going to be people surprised. We don't know who's going to be surprised yet. We don't know what the outcome is, and we don't know what it means. Um, I also see that a lot of you would like to debate that, but before the activity started, I just said share your opinions and your feelings, and so I have to defend that. Um, you know, the person shared under the conditions that they didn't feel like they were going to have to be forced to justify or argue their opinion, and um, so if that person wants to do so after class, they're welcome to. But I want to honor my commitments to all of you. So by framing the discussion, what we're going to do here is have a discussion where people are going to share their thoughts, feelings, and opinions, but you're not allowed to respond or react to the other people. We're not having a debate. We're only sharing. We're listening for learning. I created the conditions that I was able to then enforce that. Um, but so now getting back to this other lesson, right? I said separate the people from the problem. So in the political discussion, the problem is that we have different sets of priorities. We have different ranking of what are the things we care about. What do we want to most see happen in the world? We have a limited amount of budget. What do we want to spend it on? That's the problem. And so by talking about the issues in the class, be it global issues or domestic issues, based upon a reflection of underlying interests and values, what I've done in the class is frame something that it's not right and wrong, or Democrats are good or Republicans are good. I have promoted the values that I support, and I've been honest from the very beginning. Look, I have biases. So what we need to do is when somebody else thinks that I'm not doing a good job of presenting something, you interrupt me. Tell me, like, actually that's not how it is. What we want is the strongest argument to come forward no matter what the issue. What I've done is actually shown that it's okay for me to be wrong. And when I'm wrong, then the class gets to see that it's also okay for them to be wrong. The classroom has to be a safe space, right? And some of the safety is that it's okay to make mistakes. And some of what happens is that students get to find out what the opinions of people who are normally afraid to share them. But so it's a management package that instead of shying away from, uh, I don't want to say divisiveness. I actually don't want divisiveness in the classroom. I do try to manage things to keep people from having completely separate factions. But I want to encourage some of the provocative nature of education. By embracing the conflict, we can actually see, right? What's the problem? Not what are the people. Not that I think I'm smarter than you because you disagree with me and I'm brilliant and you're not, right? But we can both be smart people, but we just have different priorities and values and interests. So I try to frame it continuously in terms of what does it mean to think something, right? It's not it's for me it might be morally right or morally wrong for people to behave certain ways on a certain position. But more broadly, I can't try to universalize my value system. That I have one is something that I can share. That I can, but I can't expect students to feel or think the same ways about things as me. So so that's the second part here. Is that in part of the separating the people from the problem, I get to the other part. I focus on interests and not positions, right? So if we keep saying pro-life, pro-choice, pro-life, pro-choice, and we get stuck on the positions, and it still ends up being a lot more right or wrong. But if we get to the underlying interests, what are you affirming by a pro-choice position? What's the best defense you can give of that, right? Pro-choice means a belief in personal autonomy. Pro-choice means a belief in a right to privacy, that there are certain personal matters that should be held by an individual or held by an individual and their doctor, and that the government shouldn't have a right. So you can present the strong argument for what does choice mean. And then you get to the question about what's pro-life mean, right? And the position of pro-life, right? There's actually a broader range than most students get. So I usually try to start by saying, like, raise your hand if you're pro-life and you're willing to be called on for this, right? Because you don't want to make people talk if they don't feel comfortable with. So raise your hand if you're pro-life and you feel comfortable talking about your position. Some hands go up, and then I can ask, what kind of pro-life person are you? And then the person could say, well, what do you mean? And I'll say, well, some people believe no birth control after conception. So, some people believe no other timeline. Other people would say no condoms, right? What kind are you? And get the whole spectrum out there. And so after people see, like, all right, we could talk about this, then there's the part, why do you feel that way, right? And for some people it's religious, for some people it's practical, right? And so the whole range of different interests and values can come out, right? And then people can talk about what that means and what do other parts of the Constitution? What's the separation of church and state? What do all these different things say and how we can solve this problem? But so I think that's a really big part about this is that part of the way we handle a flip out really is based upon what is the framework for engaging in conflict been in the class so far. Um, and so if you have a framework and then somebody has a strong reaction, then you're able to say, look, all right, let's bring this back. What's the value that's being reflected here? You're getting really upset about this. So tell us more about what we're missing. Um, and right? Depending on what's happening there, right? If it's a student having a teacher-student concern, and then you can say, look, I want to have this conversation with you, but I think it's probably going to be easier for both of us if we don't do this publicly. Um, I think it's possible we can do this after class, right? But so the conflict management system is established in a classroom well in advance to the moment where there's the time where uh, emotions and energies are potentially running high. And so the framework and the rapport that's developed can create some of that. But then, so the last thing I wanted to say is that part of what we can do, especially at the university level, right? Because we're dealing with our peers as much as there's a teacher-student relationship. At Tri-C, I have students that have way more experience of the world than me. But I also have had that from young people every place I've ever taught. Um, that that you're dealing with peers and you're competent, they're competent, everybody has the capacity to manage emotions. And and so if we make that a part of our pedagogy, right? Anger is not a negative emotion. How is anger positive, right? Anger is positive in that it functions to remind us what are the things that we care about, what are our values. Anger is a positive because it can catalyze action. We tend to be conflict avoidant. So if somebody's being angry in the class, say, I mean, you don't want to be tongue in cheek, right? This is a great opportunity. Tell us more. Since you're angry, let us take advantage. I mean, of course you don't want to do that, but when somebody has an emotional response to something, that's an indicator. That's a really good indicator of interests and values. And if a student's being angry because, right, and we can learn from that, right? If a student's getting upset with you because they feel like you don't call on them, they're not going to have an outburst on the first time or the second time or something. But after 3 weeks of raising their hand and saying, like, look, you're ignoring me. Um, I learned a valuable lesson teaching peace studies in a maximum security prison. I'm historically really bad with names. Um, and I've rarely had a term where there was any opportunity. I'm just going to admit it right out. I've rarely had a term where there was any opportunity to remember all of the students' names because I'm having, a class or two of 75 or 100 or more students, and that's just too many names to remember. Um, and that's fine. I'm making excuses. I'm just saying, like, I know my limits and I can't do it. But so I went into this classroom with my 16 students, and they were like, we need to be treated with respect. And respect means you need to know our names. And I had multiple students share with me, that there's a real indignity in not having a name, but having a number. And that they weren't going to be able to find, and they were using the concepts from the class, right? I can't have my personal peace to listen to what you're saying to me unless I know that you respect me enough to know my name. So I did it. Um, but but I don't even want to say that's necessarily that it was anger that got to that place, but the feeling of respect, the necessity for respect, right? And this is primal. This is Maslow's hierarchy. This is Bloom's taxonomy. That students won't learn from you at this level if there's some needs at this level that aren't being met. Um, and we can remind ourselves of all of these details. We can role play, we can practice, we can go through this stuff in our minds. We can remember what our experiences in classrooms were like. The worst moment that I can remember in a classroom happened on the day that my brother died. I had a presentation that I needed to give, and I knew that as soon as my emotions caved in on me, I was going to be like trapped in my sorrow and my grief. And I had no idea how long it was going to be. And it was the literal last day of that class for the term. And I was scheduled to present, and I was given the option to present, later. I had no idea when later would be for a class that was almost over, but I knew that I had walls about to cave in on me. And so when I got graded on that, and when I lost points because the instructor said I seemed distracted in the presentation, I just completely lost it, you know? And in hindsight, the the unfortunate thing is that I don't think that I ever gave that professor a chance to know that I would never take them seriously again, ever. That complete lack of connection to my humanity, that they took off points because I was distracted in a presentation on the day my brother died, um, meant basically that they were dead to me. Um, I'm sure there would have been an argument if I would have raised it. I don't think that I received my points in class that day or something. Um, but there are reasons, and valid or not, right? I mean, instructor, I'm sure, would say, like, I gave you a chance to present later, you chose not to, you know, your presentation was off. I might be completely in the wrong, but I was angry, right? This is how it works. And your anger informs your behavior, and your emotions inform that. And if you can remember when that's happened for you and what that did to you as a student, then you can reflect on what that does for the people that you love, and you're trying to get them to engage with you, right? Authority never shut me down when I was in a fight growing up. It never stopped me from wanting to do whatever thing it was to the person I was angered at, right? It might have made things worse, but it never made things better, right? So if that's the case, and I'm the rarity, then I need to know that there's differences in the way people respond to their anger. Um, and I've talked to people who encourage some of the anger, right? Because they want to get it out in a way that they can manage it before it gets worse. Um, so what kind of critical feedback have you opened up your classroom for? That students can let you know that they're having problems with other students, or that students can let you know that they're having problems with you, right? So all of the conflict management has to be on your mind, and has to be part of your calculation in advance, and think the problems through before you get there. Um, and there are some very simple things, right? They might seem canned, and students might be able to see right through it, but at least you're buying yourself some time. And so I use quick writes in the classroom. If things actually get heated to a part where I'm not sure what to do next, all right, everybody, stop, freeze. What I want you to do is spend the next 30 seconds writing down and describing your feelings about what's happening in class right now. What are the things that are making you feel good? What are the things that are making you feel bad? And now you've bought yourself time. And then you can do the share, where people can reflect on their feelings about what's happening. And then if you're clever enough, you'll be able to relate that again back to the material that you're covering. But buying yourself time, getting some distance, getting some of that. You know, people who are angry, sometimes they need time to collect their thoughts too. The person who's angry might not know until after they've spent 30 seconds writing about it, what it is that they're angry about. And once you know, now you've moved away from the emotion to the value and the interest. And what does that mean? And how can that be valuable? So obviously I could go on about this. I'm very passionate about my time in the classroom, and I'm sure you are as well. Maybe I'll even have another one of these, but for now, this is Wim, signing out.